What up? What up? What up? I hope everybody's having a great start to their new year. Sorry for this bum ass camera. My DSLR seems to be on the fritz, and so I definitely wanted to make sure that I gave you this quality conversation. But this is what we have to deal with. And sometimes, man, we gotta make adjustments the way we gotta adjust the situation. So, um, I wanted to first and foremost wish everybody a happy new year. I hope everybody is having a great start to it. And I wanted to talk to you guys with first starting out with a question, and that is, what new thing are you doing this year? So you can put it in the chat. If you watch the replay, put it in the replay. What new thing are you doing this year? And I'm asking this question because every time I talk to folks in the new year, they're always excited and or a little anxious about the new year and what the new year is going to bring. And I got this from, my family when they were wishing me Happy New Year, or talking to some other colleagues, talking to some friends. And I posted something this past few days that I wanted to pose to you, and that is, instead of you worrying about the new stuff, why not double down on the old stuff, on the stuff that has been working, on the stuff that has helped you utilize some gains. And we're going to talk about how to do this in your life as well as in your style. But I wanted to offer that insight because a lot of us, myself included in the past, we tend to get excited about this new opportunity or this new placement or this new objective. And some people think that I'm being a pessimist when I'm like, yo, just focus on what you are already utilizing, or focus on what you have. But what I'm really trying to provide is the awareness that can come with really cultivating your own style and what that actually means in your own life. So there's this concept called the Dunning burgers. I always say this wrong. Let me look it up real quick. I had it and I should have just had it. The Dunning Kruger effect. Now, the Dunning Kruger effect is this concept of knowing, believing, or thinking that you know more than you do, right? And this is gonna also play into like news. So a lot of us, especially when I'm talking to style guys, they think they know they shit, especially when they first starting out. Like, oh yeah, man, this is a jigger button on the inside of your jacket when you're putting it on. You're supposed to only button one button on a two button, the top button, and then the middle button if it's a three button. And all that stuff is great, but then they don't really know what they don't know. And so there's this overconfidence in what it is that they have an awareness of, and they don't allow themselves to continue to build upon that. And so they then start looking for something new. So I have a young guy that I know, and he is a very astute dresser, very astute and articulate guy. But he's young, and so he talks a lot about style and tailoring and all these other different types of things. And he reminds me a lot of Matt Damon in Good Will Hunting. You guys seen that movie? So Good Will Hunting, Matt Damon's character, I forgot what his name is. He comes in and he is able to spout out all of this information. And so Robin Williams' character, who happens to be a psychiatrist who's working with him, um, the he starts to have a conversation with him, and he's like, if I were to talk to you about romance, you probably would spout out this author. If I was to talk to you about war, you would probably spout out this author. He said, but if I was to ask you about the experience of love, the experience of war, the experience of challenge, would you be able to speak to that? And there's an interesting dynamic when you have somebody who is informed but not knowledgeable, or who's knowledgeable but has no experience. And so this young man, he has a very small level of knowledge, or actually, I'm sorry, of information, but doesn't really have any knowledge. And so there is this arrogance, there's this confidence that comes into this place because he thinks that he knows some shit that he doesn't know, right? So he's now like, oh, I'm gonna just move on to some new shit. Zeb Cola says, the more you learn, the more you realize how little you know, and it applies to pretty much anything. Yeah. So in the see the Dunning Kruger effect, it's gonna bother me. The Dunning Kruger effect, essentially, that is what happens. You start to garner to the space of a peak of realizing, like, oh, I really don't know as much as I thought I did. And then you start to really delve deeper into a subject matter. You realize you don't know shit about that whole subject matter. And so there's a humility that comes with it once you have that awareness. And so you're much more accommodating, you're much more patient with the other guys, or the other people when you have those awarenesses and those experiences. And so when I'm talking to a lot of guys, they right now they'll always be like, "Man, I ain't worried about that old stuff. I'm on to the newness." Right? And when we're building up our wardrobe, this actually is very prevalent because you'll have one guy who's like, I don't want anything old. I don't want anything vintage. I don't want anything that somebody's worn before. I don't want to uh, go dumpster diving. I've heard that before with some guys when it comes to developing their wardrobe and a qualitative wardrobe with utilizing secondhand or gently used items, right? That may have been found in different places. And they're like, man, I don't want any of that old stuff. And so then they'll go spend $600-700 on spaces like Amazon or Sheen or what have you to say that they got something new, but they got some new bullshit. There's a concept called planned obsolescence, and right now we're seeing that more than ever, where people are making and creating these cheap items so that they don't have to be kept for a long time. Now, some I was talking to one guy. He was like, "Yeah, I'm cool with that." He said, "Why would I want to keep something longer than a year anyway? Like, it's on to the next one." And I was like, "Well, what happens if you really enjoy that look, or it speaks to you and what you're about and how you want to move and all those other different types of things?" He was like, "I enjoy it while I had it, and then I move on." And I started. He was a younger guy. He was another younger guy as well. And I started to realize what is happening in that this arbitrary encounter, arbitrary appreciation society that we're having is that that's translating through the rest of their lifestyle. So you'll have people who don't want to have anything quote unquote old. They don't appreciate the evolution of something as it develops over time. They only want to have what's new. They only are worried about that new car smell. They're only worried about what the new cool restaurant is. They're only worried about what the new trend is. They're only worried about what that new girl is and how exciting she's going to be. And so they never really get the opportunity to experience evolution of a thing. And I was like talking to older cats because older cats, especially if they get some money, they will often appreciate older things. So I have a client that I've assisted working with, and he wealthy guy, very wealthy guy, and he recently just restored an old Land Rover, right? That he had. Now he kind of modernized it, but he kept the essence of the classic Land Rover. Now this car was probably I think $100,000 to restore, and it kind of spoke to the fact that people forget that these things have staying power. These things, once you have a true understanding and appreciation, have staying power. And so I started to think about the newness that we always are seeking to go after. And if you've been rocking with me for a little while, even if you haven't, this is an opportunity for you too to think about this consciously, to begin to construct your closet, and then ultimately communicate yourself to the world. Sorry if you're hearing any background noise. There's my niece is running around up here. Um, and so this is the opportunity for you to have a deeper understanding of why you need to stop worrying about the new ish and to focus on the development of what you already have. So the first thing that you have to be thinking about is appreciation. So this past year, over the holidays, we told our family that we were not going to be exchanging gifts with anybody. And you would have thought like we had denounced Christmas or we had denounced uh, our family, right? We went from us just saying we're no longer going to celebrate or no longer going to give gifts on Christmas, and this with the caveat of understanding, especially to our nieces and nephews, they get stuff, and I'm not exaggerating, almost every month. And I'm not just talking about little trinkets or little toys or any of those different types of things. I'm talking about like 60, 70, 80, 150, $400 purchases that can come from some member of their family throughout the year. Are they great kids? Of course. Do we enjoy giving to them? Of course. But what we started to notice was when the holidays would come around, they didn't even appreciate it. And we saw it actually this past holiday where some of our nieces got an item, they got a toy, played with it for about 10 minutes, and then they threw it away. Did y'all have any young ones that did that? They had one or two things, and then they got 15, 20 items, and they played with it for 10 minutes, and then discarded it. Like my nieces happen to just be back on their phone. They don't have a phone, but back on their parents' phone within an hour of getting these items. And so what I started to think about was that thing that our parents used to tell us about. There's somebody over, the around the globe that would love one of these things that you seemingly don't appreciate. And my mom used to tell me something that was then reinforced later on that what you appreciate will appreciate. The good book Bible says that be a faithful steward over a few things, and then God will make you ruler over many. Many. It's not religious, but it is a good thought process. And appreciation is a business term. So the more you appreciate something, the more valuable or the more it grows, and potentially the more valuable it gets. This is why guys who have, Rolexes from the First World War or the Second World War, and they still have papers on those, can sell those watches for 225,000. There was a guy, older guy, it's probably his 80s. He happened to have a Rolex with papers, and I think it sold for like 85, $90,000. And that was probably low volume. It may have been a little bit more than that. And it was because he took care of it, he appreciated it, and he was able to continue to develop it. Zelko says, worse is when a kid just wants the box. Then we ruin. Well, see, especially when they're little, I'm always like, just give them a box and some crayons. They're amazing. You can give them a apple wrapped up with something. They're excited, right? So you have that aspect. Then the appreciation comes really with the understanding of the item or the experience or the revenue, any of those other types of things. And so when I've had guys and I've had the pleasure and the blessing of doing this, I'll have something that I really enjoy. Like there was when I was in New York, when I first got to visit New York, a friend of mine let me stay with them, and I had this beautiful gold and white gingham check Ralph Lauren purple label shirt. Found it on eBay. Was probably my favorite shirt. I had just gotten it, let's say 5 weeks prior, and he complimented me on it like two or three times. And when I was leaving, he allowed me, when I went to New York, he allowed me to stay there for roughly about 4 days. Didn't ask me for anything, didn't need anything, showed me around town, really showed me a great time. And so what I did was I gave him my yellow shirt. Now, I didn't get to see him for another 2 years. When I came back, the thing that I really, really appreciated and that made me feel good was he still had it. He was utilizing it, wearing, he was showing and finding different ways to wear it and to put it together. And so it made my respect and our relationship grow just because I knew he took care of things. When my nephew, who happens to be the oldest in our family, when he gets something, he takes care of it. And uh, last year he got a pair of other they call panda dunks. I think that's what they're called. I don't know nothing about sneakers, nothing about sneakers. But I think they were panda dunks. But it was one of those sneakers. And so he came 6 months later, and like the joints look brand new. And I'm talking about to the point that there's no crease on the the toe, right? There's no, they look brand new. It was no, there was no dirt on them. Like he keeps his joints fresh. And I remember telling him, like, I have no problem buying you some shoes. Like, absolutely no problem. 'Cause I know you're gonna take care of them, right? And so it's made me start to think about how often we care for the things that we say we want, right? So I've had numerous guys who say, "Man, I want to get this expensive suit. I want to go and get a Ralph Lauren Purple Label suit," and that's very accessible for a lot of guys, whether they actually are aware of it or believe it or not. And then I see how they take care of the other stuff that they have, and it makes me concerned. Not that they can't afford it or they can't obtain it, but that they aren't going to properly take care of it. They're not going to properly appreciate it. And so then it's going to be damaged, or it's going to be misrepresented. It's going to miscommunicate who they are when they step out. There's nothing worse than a guy who can buy something, but he can't afford to maintain it. We've had that conversation before, right? It's not about what you can afford to buy, it's about what you can afford to maintain. And there's plenty of guys who will go buy a suit and like, oh, I'm killing it. And you be like, bro, that does not fit at all. Like, you didn't take this to the tailor? And they'll be like, I didn't think I needed to. And it's just like, or then the other side of this is that they'll say, oh, yeah, I took it to the tailor. Wow, so you didn't get a tailor or you got a tailor? That's when I'm usually concerned. They'll be like, no, I didn't get a tailor. They wanted $400 for that. And I'm like, why didn't you pay the $400? Man, I just paid. Da, 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 da. I'm not spending any money on that. And usually these are the guys who got the stuff offline or to that effect, and so they don't want to really appreciate the full process of something coming together to create a beautiful presentation, right? Zeb Color says the same with sports cars. Like, I've come to the realization, as success continues to grow for me, I'm not going to get a sport car. I don't. I drive my cars very hard, pause. And I'm rough on vehicles, so I'm not going to go spend $100,000 on a sports car that could be damaged severely because I didn't turn it right or I wasn't taking care of that space. So while I enjoy them, I enjoy watching them, I may rent a sports car. I don't need to purchase one because I don't appreciate that the same way somebody else would. And I think that there's a benefit in you understanding how to appreciate the things that you have, right? That they'll grow. So what a lot of guys will do is they'll say, well, if I do damage that or it does get messed up, I'll just get a new one. Well, then you don't have also the appreciation of developing the comfort and the confidence that's going to come with you being able to wear things over and over again. This shawl cardigan, I've had 10 years. 10, I think about like 10, if not 10, almost 10 years since I moved to Atlanta. And every time I wear it, I always get compliments. People are always like, where did you get that? And I've always brought back to what my mentor used to say. And he was like, men of style don't buy clothes, they obtain them or they just own them. And there's something to be said about something that can have sustainability. There's something to be said about a guy who can invest in quality and get that return. We had a client who spent $10,000 on a suit, um, probably about 15 years ago, 2025. So yeah, maybe like 2010. And He came in, he needed to have some adjustments made. He lost some weight, so we were making some adjustments. And I remember when he put it on, everybody kind of stopped and came to look at that suit and kind of marveled at it because it wasn't out of style. It looked like he had just gotten it, and it was something that he had been wearing over and over again to important board meetings, to conferences, to different spaces where he was being honored. That was black tie optional. There were all these places that he was wearing, and he was getting so much benefit off of it. But every time that he wore it, somebody would have thought that it was new because of how it was cared for, how it was appreciated. And there was a comfort that came with that because he had evolved in that. He was growing confident in that. And this is probably one of the most important things for guys to really have an understanding of not getting new ish and why it's important not to just get new ish. Is because it takes time for you to really and fully appreciate what it is you have, what it is that you're wearing, how you're wearing, how it needs to be perceived, how it needs to be presented, how it can be presented. And so it's important for you to have that awareness and that understanding. And the next thing that you have to do to stop worrying about the new ish is to start to construct things that are curated. So part of the reason why you can't do new things or new ish, right? You can't just worry about going to buy the new ish or do the new ish, that you can't curate anything behind that. There have been times where in life you try to curate like relationships. Oh man, I'm like, man, yeah, such cool. I'm gonna kick it with him, da, da, da. And you kick it with him twice, and you be like, I don't really like that dude. I don't, we don't really align, right? Or there's been other times where you find yourself in a situation where you're kind of put into a place where you are interacting with somebody over and over again. And at first you're thinking, man, like this dude gonna be it. Man, I ain't trying to deal with this dude. And then you start interacting with them, and that builds camaraderie. You start to find the cohesiveness and the connection in that relationship. And so what I've had to remind a lot of fellas, especially young fellas, is how you know you get friends is if you've been through something or you have time. So you can expedite a process of friendship and a bond and brotherhood if you are willing to go through something with people, right? With that person. So something as simple as going through like a ropes course. And I don't know if you guys know what a ropes course is, but it's where you have to get up on this ledge. You may have to cross a line bridge, with no with only your harness on, or you're doing trust falls, all those leadership developments that you've probably seen or taken part in. Those usually do form a lot of camaraderie with the people that you're with. Gangs. Part of the reason why people have such strong times with gangs and friendships and brotherhoods is because they've been through stuff with each other. They've been through literal wars with one another. This is why army guys are in that space. The other side is if you give something time to mature, a la you've had homies since you were in high school, you now are in your mid 20s. You guys have experienced some growth and development together in that space as well. Well, P says guys should figure in alterations as part of the price of their garment. They should, um, but I think that in most qualitative places will have alterations included in your price point when you're getting stuff done, or they'll tell you this is how much it's going to be because they folded it in. But even if you don't, like, yes, have that budget there, or don't wear it until you can afford to pay for the alterations. Just a thought. So when it comes to your clothing, when it comes to your closet and your personal style, you have to give yourself time to either mature or you have to take it through some trials and tribulations. Tell them what's going on, bro. So what's happened for some guys is they will go into a space and they will have to wear something that's tailored, it fits, it's doing what it's supposed to do, but they wore it to a big meeting. Maybe this wasn't a make or break meeting or promotional meeting, but it may have been a big presentation that was on the way to them getting a promotion. And they do very, very well in. Well, now that energy, whether you realize it or not, seeps into that fabric. This is why you have the people with superstitions like, oh, I wear the same socks every game day. I haven't washed them in a year and they funky and nasty and all that other stuff, right? There's because there's an awareness that energy will be in that, even if it's just the energy that you're giving it as a talisman, right? So in that space, when they start wearing that, then they're like, oh man, I wore that out to the presentation. It got a good response. Then I decided to wear that out at a social engagement, got a good, um, got a few phone numbers, made a few networks. Then, I wore that on a date, and yeah, she thought I was the flyest thing out. Well, it's because you're reinforcing that energy based on what it is that you're wearing. Now, that can happen almost immediately, and I've encouraged a lot of guys to get wear out of their pieces when I'm working with them so that they have that reinforcement, or it can happen over time. And this is interesting because when you have a qualitative garment, when you have qualitative items, when you have a qualitative woman, when you have qualitative friends, you start to realize that appreciation because you can see how many dynamics and how many ways that entity or that dynamic can be utilized, not necessarily manipulated. And I hope, we're not trying to manipulate each other, but how it can be utilized. There's some of my closest friends have become my closest friends, not just because of us going through some stuff. It's just been like, yo, when I was in this good space, man, they were bigging me up and helping me find some other ways to utilize what it is that I was promoting. When I was in this bad space, they were there to lift me up and just be a ear to help me continue to develop. And then when I was in this neutral space, they were like, yo, get your ass up, start to do things. And they were the purveyors of my motivation, right? And vice versa. I may have shown up in different ways for them. And so that creates our connection in that space. And this is why when I'm working with clients and the hundreds of clients that I've worked with, we always talk about curating your wardrobe, right? You can't curate something if you're constantly worrying about new stuff because a curation is actually about you editing and being strategic about what it is that you're putting into a collection. If you've ever watched a collection come together, one of the most interesting things is not the amount of pieces that end up in the final collection, but actually the amount of pieces that started out in the initial collection. Usually they're whittling things down sometimes until the last 2 weeks. They just like, yo, this was our inspiration. We went very wide with the options that we wanted to pull out. Then we started to figure out that we wanted this to be more refined or sensual, or we wanted this to be more professional and conservative, right? And so then we're going to bring that down here. Now we're going to start thinking about whether or not we want this to be uh, more regional or more national or more international. So that brings that down there. What colors, what fabrics are we using? So you start to see these things become much more focalized as the time progresses. That Mo says hella pieces, right? So in that space, what we start to see is the development of the curated wardrobe or the curated collection. And so when we're developing that space with ourselves, we have to be able to give it time. And you can't do that if you're worrying about something new every time the new year rolls around, the new month rolls around, the new season rolls around, the new trend comes out, whatever those different types of things. You have to have the awareness of yourself to continue to curate those things. And lastly, you have to give yourself time, right? You can't just worry about whatever's new if you really want to communicate who you are at the highest level. If for the guys who know me, I've been talking about the psychology behind style or the sartorialism or the psychology behind sartorialism for almost 15 years, almost 2 decades at this point. So right, a decade and a half. Because one, there's all these new things to learn. right? There's all these new concepts to pick up that find themselves correlating with aspects of style. There's all these new dynamics when we start talking about color, how we view color, how we experience color, how we wear color, how we navigate color, what color says to us, what color says to others in other countries, in other cultures, how that then will process itself or promote itself when you are engaging with someone, right? So it goes back to that Dunning Kruger effect. You think you know some shit about color. Oh yeah, red is the most vibrant color on the color scale, so that's why they use it in ads. And then you start figuring out what red means in Asia, in different countries in Asia, what red means in Africa, how those things then process our emotional countenance, and then what that means depending on the height or the variation of what the red that you're using. Are you using fire engine red, brick red? Are you using a sun red? Are you using a more orange red? All of these different dynamics may have a different experience for the person who is experiencing it, right? And then how do you place that red with something else? If you put it with a red, if you make the red the base for a plaid, does that change the dynamic that somebody's going to have when they are watching you in it? So over the course of time, you start to realize that there are so many different avenues that you have to think about when you are actually creating communication. You know, when you're watching children play, a lot of times, children will just say whatever's on their mind, and it'll be disrespectful. You'll be like, "Yo, I can't believe they just said that." And old people will do this as well, right? Old people past a certain age, they just be, "I don't give them that." I told the child she was a hoe. I told him his breath stink. I told right? And you like, I'm Mabel. You can't just be saying that to people. I don't got a whole lot of time on this world, baby. I'm just gonna tell her like it is, right? And in both cases, we laugh. But there's also the people who have the ability to communicate themselves eloquently. My mentor, when I was in college, said something to me in this most eloquent way. He was like, "Yo, you are ambitious. You just don't know what that means." And I remember I had to sit with that for about 4 weeks, right? And I would come back and ask him like, "Yo, what do you mean by that?" And he'd be like, "Just think on it." So by the fourth week, I was like, "Listen, I spent 4 weeks thinking about this. This is driving me nuts. I just need to know what you mean." And essentially, all he was saying was, "You're lazy. You have these big, lofty goals, these big dreams, but you're not putting in the necessary man hours, the work, the time, the appreciation to cultivate these things, and you have them inside of you. You have the ability to do these things, but you're not because you're lazy. And laziness is only a byproduct of fear. Right? So any person who's lazy is usually afraid. And so during that process, I was like, oh, I had to take some real looks at myself. But the eloquence of how he was able to say that came in simplicity, but it also came in nuance of what he was expressing. And I've noticed that when you start to think about your closet, the more consistent that you can put together a look, the more intentional, but also the more dynamic and dangerous that look ends up being. Because people are like, oh man, every time I see you on point. And they don't realize you probably are revisiting the same look 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 20 times over the course of a year because you know that this is what works, but it continues to communicate the same thing consistently. Zepcolor says qualitative in terms of the type of fit or color or design or the quality of how it's made, all of the above. So a lot of guys don't think about uh, a great place to start. Let's think about this in stages, and we'll actually talk about that. Zev, will you do me a huge favor? Will you send me this question and then say elaborate on this next week? I have to make a meeting, so I apologize, guys. I thought we wouldn't have the technical difficulties, we'd have been fine. But Zev, I'm going to do a deeper dive on that next week. So um, it's all of the above. But a lot of times people don't realize that higher quality garments have different quality colors. They have a different quality of design and how they're made. They have a different quality of how they fit and how they are expressed. So stop worrying about the new ish. And the thing that often people don't realize when they are that they're communicating, when they are constantly worrying about the new thing is that they are realizing, and they're not realizing that they're communicating their lack of passion and dedication to something. Have you ever noticed that the people who are the most successful seem to be the most dedicated to something? Whether we look at Steve Jobs, or there was a her name is going to bother me. Um, she did the blue eye brown eye test, and this name blue eye brown eye experiment. Um, from Jane Elliott. I had to look up her name because that was going to bother me if I didn't know. Right. So Jane Elliott. Jane Elliott has made a career since the 70s, I believe. So for almost 60 years, she has been having this conversation. Now, this is around race and around the social dynamics and things of that nature. But for almost 60 years, she's been able to do that. If you think about Apple, or you think about any of these long-standing brands, or any of these long-standing stylish guys, they have a core focus and they do stuff consistently. Now, they may make slight adjustments, but they stay consistent there. If you think about somebody like Anna Wintour, who's had the same haircut for 40 years, 4 decades. I'm exaggerating a little bit, but probably like 32, right? But these things now become signatures because they've gone through the awareness of like the excitement of the newness. They've then decided to navigate through the valleys, and then they climbed up into the real awareness, that humility and that patience that we talked about, so that they can show themselves as the best versions of themselves. And that's a very powerful position to find yourself in when you really have a understanding, and you know, because in that space you're no longer worried about what everybody else is doing. You realize I don't need to keep on jumping to the new thing because I set the tone and the trends for how I'm going to move throughout life. And the more that you can do that, the closer you are to cultivating and really developing your signature style. So I got to go, but I want you to try this on, see how it fits you. And if it fits you well, share it with somebody. And if not, leave it right here where it is in the dressing room. I got a new video coming out on YouTube. Please make sure that you check that out because I'm committed, right? I'm not worrying about some new stuff. I'm staying focused on that. So outside of that, be great today. Apologies for last week. I actually am still recovering from bronchitis. And so that's why I wasn't on last week coming into the new year because I had a lot going on. But outside of that, be great today. And as always, don't ever forget that dress is nothing more than the expression of a man's state of mind. So that's you, should always dress to address your life and your style. And we'll make today a great one. Peace.